the first question to you that we met at the symposium of Oxford. So we met in Oxford, but it was not a real Oxford place. It was online. It was a Zoom symposium, with Zoom. And I know that you make a lot of presentation and a lot of conferences and a lot of meetings in the real world. What do you think on a conference online? So at a conference with Zoom and not in the real face. What do you think of them? Do you like them?
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Now, in order to answer this question, an important distinction should be made, namely the distinction between information and communication. Information is a one unilateral relation whereby an individual A transfers some pieces of knowledge to another one, let me call it B. On the other hand, communication, it's a word which comes from Latin. That should be known. And Latin is cum munus, which means literally putting together the gift. Munus in Latin means gift. Putting together gift, which means that communication is a bilateral relation whereby A goes towards B and B towards A. So, to answer your question, we can say that the new technologies are okay and very good for the information, for transmitting information. And in fact, every one of us is enough to enter the web to receive all the information required. But the new technologies are not good if we want to maintain the word communication. And that is the point, that in common language, we keep on using the word communication. But what is going on is not real communication, it's information. So the question today, and in particular for the future, is how to create spaces and situations where real communication can take place. Because human beings need to communicate. Not only they need information. It is just to give an analogy, the same distinction which in the world of schools and university, the distinction between instruction and education. You can instruct. Suppose that I am a teacher. I can instruct my pupils, my students using the new technologies. But education is something different because as we know, education means an act whereby a person, in this case the teacher, helps another person, a student, to expand his or her own capabilities to enter what is called total reality. So that is why you cannot educate via the new technologies. I know that most people use that expression, but they are wrong, because they do not know the meaning of the words they are using. To repeat, it is possible to instruct, because instruction is like information. Suppose that I am the teacher of mathematics, I can instruct my pupil about mathematics, even though I speak through a distance in a virtual way. But education presupposes interpersonal relations. The educator and the person to be educated need to interact on a personal basis. Just to be more specific, I need to see the person in front of me in his or her eyes. And I need to perceive, for instance, the sentiments, the moral sentiments, or sometimes the emotions. Via the new technologies, emotions are not relieved. And so I cannot recognize the emotional state of a student with the use of the new technologies, digital technologies. And so in conclusion, that is important to keep in mind. We cannot do without using the digital technologies, because it is impossible to think to go back or to stop the so-called technological progress. But at the same time, we needed to find new ways of compensation. Because if we identify information with communication, and we identify instruction with education, we commit major mistakes, and major troubles and major problems will occur. And then it is what in particular the younger generation ask. Of course, they do not use this wording, the wording that I have used, but they implicitly ask the teachers, the professors, to enter into interpersonal relations. That is why on October 15 last year, Pope Francis published the so-called Global Pact on Education. And that is an important document, very important. He didn't call it a Global Pact on Instruction, but Global Pact on Education. And if you read that document, he mentioned exactly this point. Today, we do not, in our world, of course, I'm talking to the so-called advanced countries, such as Hungary, Italy, and many others. But in our countries today, we do not lack instruction. What we lack is education. And that is the new challenge facing our systems in this historical period.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this for this answer. And my next topic is that in Oxford symposium, you were talking about reciprocity. And I know that reciprocity is a very main topic of you. You speak a lot about this phenomena. And I would like us to explain what is reciprocity, and if we can practice reciprocity via internet. So how does this relate to the digital world?
Yes, this is an important question. You know that the expression homo economicus was coined in the middle of the 19th century. John Stuart Mill, the famous economist and philosopher from England, was the one who utilized it. That was the year 1852. And it was meant to refer to an agent, an economic agent, who has two characteristics: rationality and self-interest. In other words, who is an homo economicus? Is a person who behaves rationally and pursues his or her own self-interest. Full stop. That is the definition. Of course, that already John Stuart Mill mentioned that was not a proper description of an economic agent. John Stuart Mill, as I said, was also a philosopher, an important philosopher. So he said, we cannot reduce the human being only to the economic dimension. But on the other hand, he knew that people following the homo economicus perspective, they used to meet each other in the marketplace. And the marketplace is a physical place. And people, although each one participating to the market game had to pursue self-interest, still they interacted among themselves. So there was, in a sense, an element of reciprocity, even in a position like that of the homo economicus. The situation changed when the new technologies, starting last century, in particular in the year 70s of last century, the time of the third industrial revolution, because it is the time of the third industrial revolution that internet was created in the 70s of last century. What happened? is that the marketplace started disappearing. Look what happened in this pandemic. Most people, they do not go to the marketplace. They order using the so-called e-commerce, e-trade, electronic trade, e-commerce to order. In other words, today we are lacking that space of interpersonal relations, which used to be in the past. When you go to a supermarket or a commercial center, you do not speak to people. You only speak when at the end of your buying, you have to pay. And there is a person at the cashier who makes and you cannot say not even good morning or good night, because he or she has no time to do that. That is what people have to understand. So the supermarkets, using the new technologies, they are eliminating that interpersonal relation. I remember when I was a child, a long time ago, when my mother asked me to go shopping to buy something for the family, I used to entertain a sort of discourse, little discourses, some stories with the person. Today, that is so. That is why today the assumption of homo economicus is particularly dangerous, because in the past, homo economicus could be, in a sense, compensated by these forms of interaction. Today, just because the new media, as I said before, transmit information, not communication, maintaining the assumption of homo economicus will destroy our happiness. That is the point. That is the reason why the happiness indicators are declining in our countries year after year, as the United Nations report, which is being published every year, documents in a very clear way, etc. So today, that is why we need to resurrect, so to speak, the notion of homo reciprocus. Because homo economicus could be maintained, but is not enough, is useless today. We have to go back to homo reciprocus, which means to apply into practice the notion of reciprocity. Now, the notion of reciprocity is different from the notion of exchange, because the logic is different. Because the logic of exchange in the marketplace is based on self-interest. I want to buy your house, and we bargaining among ourselves about the price. At the end of the bargaining process, I give you the money and you give me the keys. So there is an equivalence of value. In reciprocity, it's not like that, because the personal reciprocity presupposes an initial act of gift, an initial act of gift. In other words, I observe that you are in need because you are suffering, because you are poor, because you are sad, you have one problem or another, and then I voluntarily come to you without negotiating, without saying, look, how much do you want to give me if you want me to help you? You know, that is the basic difference. That is the reasoning in the exchange relations. But I do that on the expectations, not on the right, but the expectation that you, in a future time, when you will observe that I am in need, you will try to help me. On the basis of the principle of proportionality, not of equivalence. That is the good point of reciprocity. In other words, if I help you with and help, let me say, value 100, you can reciprocate with something whose value is 50 or even 150, according to your actual capabilities. In the exchange relation, it's not like that. The price is what the buyer has to pay in order to obtain the good or the commodity or the service required. That is why we need to expand in our societies the principle of reciprocity. But to expand, we need to incentivize practices of reciprocity. Now, for those who are believers, who are Christian, Christian knows that the fundamental relations of Christianity is reciprocity. Because the Christian God is the only God who is Trinitarian. The Muslims, the Jews, etc., they do not have a Trinitarian, a multi-person God. Only Christianity. You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And what is the relations among the three? Tell me, is a relation of exchange? No, it's a relation of reciprocity. And the same is true between God and human beings. The God offers us his gift. He offers us what is called the salvation, but we have to take it, because we human beings we can refuse to obtain salvation. And the fact that I accept the gift of God is a sign of reciprocity, etc. The same is true within the family. How would you describe the relation between a father, a mother, and a child? Tell me, is a relation of exchange? Of course not. Is an exchange of duty, of command? No, it's a relation of reciprocity. The mother, the father loves the child, blah, blah, and the child reciprocates in a different way. Could reciprocate with a smile, or by saying a nice word, etc., etc. So in conclusion, what is an important point is that the introduction of the new technologies today represents a major impulse to expand the area of reciprocity practices. That is the key point of our discussion. In other words, in the past, there was no need to insist on that for the reasons that I explained before. But with the new technologies, the fact that people interact at long distances without touching each other implies that we need to expand. And that becomes a policy issue, because the further question is, how should we organize our societies? How should we rewrite our laws, our, let's say, rules at the national or international level in order to facilitate reciprocity relations? Because the sad fact is that today in many countries, included my country, which is Italy, the rules of the game are against reciprocity. We have observed that during the pandemic. That is a scandal that should be denounced. In other words, during the pandemic, only exchanges and commands, orders were followed, but not reciprocity. And that is a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I have reasons to believe that in the near future, many things will change if people start reasoning. Because to conclude, we human beings cannot live without reciprocity. We could live without exchanges, but not without reciprocity. That is the point that should be kept in mind. Thank you. Next.
Could you tell me an example? How would you practice reciprocity in the digital world? So, because it's communication.
Yes. Now, you know that in Europe, there is an expression which goes as following: third sector organization. Third sector organization includes a volunteer association, association of social promotion, include social enterprises or foundations of one type or the other, etc. All these entities are included under the heading of third sector. Third sector, why? Because the first sector is the government sector or public sector. The second is private sector. And the third sector includes what we call, at least in Italy, the civil sector. In other words, to answer your question then, we need to rewrite our basic laws, and in Italy we have already started very recently, at the level of the Constitutional Court. We passed the Italian Constitutional Court last June, passed a new sentence number 131, which is a revolution. And you will see that in the near future, that will have a major impact. What does it say? The sentence says that the three sectors are to be put on the same level of dignity and relevance. In other words, volunteer groups, churches, or consider, for instance, Caritas. What is Caritas? It's an organization. But can you say that Caritas is like a business firm? Of course not. But Caritas is not even a public entity because it does not belong to the government. So this sentence says that if we want to modify our, let's say, outlook in the present days, we need to expand the area of the third sector. In other words, we have to move from the bipolar model of social order based on state and market to a tripolar model, state, market, and community. So the key word is community. We have to reinforce community. And in that case, we can cope with what we were saying before, with the, let's say, missings of what I said before. Because look, I don't know the situation of Hungary. I know quite well the situation of my country. But during this pandemic, if we did not have volunteer groups, volunteer associations, it would have been a disaster, because these people who operate because they have a mission in mind, because they have intrinsic motivations, they helped elderly people, they helped those who are suffering in a way that the government could not do that. And so we have to understand that. See, and the same will be true in the near future when we are considering the rewriting of the welfare state. The welfare state today is unhelpful. We need to move from the welfare state to the welfare society. And that makes a big difference. It is the whole society which should take care of the people. And who exists in the society? In the society, we observe the government, we observe the enterprises, but we observe also what I call the third sector organization or third sector entities, etc. So that is a novelty that the pandemic has increased considerably, which does not mean that government and market should disappear. Of course not. What I'm saying, we have to rebalance the area of influence of the three realities, which always existed in the past, and then after the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, they disappeared a bit. Now they are resurrecting. They are because we should never forget that the so-called third sector organizations, they were born in the 13th century, were in Tuscany, in Italy. And they were called confraternite because they were religious. And who invented the hospital? Tell me. The hospital, as we know it today, where was it? The first hospital was created in Siena, in Tuscany, in the 13th century. And then it spread around, but was not created by the government of the time or by the merchant, by these entities, which in Italian are called confraternities. We can say congregations, congregation of nuns, friars, or even normal people, etc., etc. So we have to keep that in mind, because history cannot be cancelled. Otherwise, it is obvious that we are doomed to repeat a certain mistake. It seems to me that these ideas are spreading even in the United States. If you read the book, the recent book by the American economist, whose name is Rajan, the book is titled is State, Market, Community. And that is the first time the book will appear 2 years ago, in the year 2019, 2 years ago. State, Market, Community. And if you read that book, of course, for us, it's nothing new. But for the Americans or even other countries, that is a novelty, because never before the community was taken by an economist. Community was always taken by sociologists, by philosophers, theologians, but not by economists. Today, economics, the new economics, takes into explicit consideration the role, the economic role and the social role of community.
Mm-hmm. And my last question now, that who is Homo curator? You were talking about Homo economicus, Homo reciprocans, and there is a third category mentioned recently, Homo curator.
Yes, that is a very, very important question. To answer this question, let me clarify two notions on the concept of responsibility. The word responsibility is linked to two Latin words. One is respondeo, which in Latin means to provide answers, to provide responses, to give answers. And according to this notion, responsible is the person who gives responses of what he or she has done. In the literature, this is called responsibility as accountability. I do certain things, I perform certain actions, and I am responsible for the consequences of my actions. But there is a second notion of responsibility, which derives from the Latin respondus. Respondus in Latin means the way of things. According to this notion, responsibility means the capability of a person to put on his or her shoulders the way of things. In other words, the problems that the person observes. Now, this is the responsibility as taking care. So two are the notions of responsibility. Responsibility as accountability, as taking care. Homo curator corresponds to the second notion of responsibility. And what is the best example to clarify the issue? Is the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan, what did he? He was not the cause of the trouble of the poor man who was laying down along the street. He did nothing against him. So according to the first notion of responsibility, he was not responsible. And that is the reason why the other two fellows who passed by before him, they passed away. Because they said, we are not responsible. Full stop. But the Good Samaritan, what did? He stopped his horse, went down and helped the poor man, etc., etc. Why? Because he behaved like homo curator. Even though he was not the cause of the disease, of the trouble of the poor fellow, he took care. Now, today, what we need is exactly this figure. Because we have been too hypocritical so far in our countries. Because we have always considered that responsibility means that I am responsible for what I do. No. I am responsible for what I do not do, even though I am in a position of doing. That is the point. In other words, the sin of omission is always more serious than the sin of commission. That is written in the book. Even though one is not a believer, never mind, because that is clear to all cultures in the world. In other words, I cannot just say I try not to do any harm. Of course, I have not to do any harm. But the first thing to do for me is to take care, if I have the abilities, to, of course, to do that, of those who are in trouble. And the notion of homo curator today is the key notion if we want to face the challenges of the present time in our society. Otherwise, homo economicus will not solve all these problems. And there is a book coming from an American scholar, not yet published. I read it because I have to pass a judgment. And it's a fascinating book. And it was written by an economist. And the title of the book is the Good Samaritan irrational? Question mark. Fantastic, beautiful. In other words, he said, according to the Homo economicus theory, the Good Samaritan was a stupid man because he wasted time, he wasted money to help that poor. And so in this book, I was fascinated because he's an American. He understood that we cannot continue in our university to preach and to teach Homo economicus. We have to say that, but stop it. We we have to teach the virtues of Homo curator. In other words, the notion of responsibility as taking care. And it is time today that these novelties perhaps might enter into the textbooks of economics, even though it will be sometimes difficult, because most economists have framed their mind with the wrong ideas. And that is why Pope Francis organized in Assisi last November the economy of Francesco. Why? That is the reason. And why did he say, I only want people, young people, below 35? And when I asked him, why you want only young people? He said, because older people, they do not change their mind, because they are stubborn. They want to continue to do and to think in the way they've been. I need young fellows who might make a career in the academic life, into the business, etc., who, if they get convinced of the centrality of the idea of Homo curator, they can change their teaching, their textbooks, etc. In other words, they might produce a new culture. And I have reasons to believe that the university to which Sister Laura is applied follows this track. That is why I wish you all that is good and continue along the track that you have already started in your important organization.
Thank you very much. I would have listened to you for more and more time, but our time is over. And I wish that these thoughts, what you were talking about now, would spread and would find listeners and followers. It just one thing occurs to me, that the doctors in Hungary were said to be very good, very helpful, and very, very, very good to the patients. So I would say they are homo curators. And I think in Italy is the same. So the occupation of being a doctor or being a nurse is like being homo curators.
Yes, I agree.
You agree.
You are right. But you should continue, because the work that you are doing is very, very important in your small universities. It's small in terms of size, but it's very relevant in terms of provoking new thought. and I promise that next year I come to see you. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
We
I
stay
get your
together,
word.
because I always enjoy with stay. You know that my granddaughter, she is 22. She passed the first semester in Hungary in the university exchange. And so she was able to learn a bit of Hungarian language. So she's teaching. So I said to her, next year when I go, you come with me. And,
okay.
And so you will know. The point is that they couldn't move because of the COVID pandemic. And so she had to stay rather isolated. Otherwise, but she enjoyed very much. She said that the Hungarian people are nice people, and that the cultural roots of Hungary are very important, and she learned a lot. So next year I come with her. Okay.
Yeah, okay, and she will make a presentation too. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you, Sister Laura. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye now.